Welcome to Analytics Nexus. Thanks for joining us for Jackie Distasi's presentation, Creating a Strategic Analytics Organization. Jackie is the Director of Digital Analytics for Wyndham Hotels and Resorts, the world's largest hotel franchisor with over 9,200 hotels in more than 80 countries. She manages all aspects of reporting and analysis for over 20 brand sites and 13 language variants, including site performance, monitoring, customer journey analysis, visitor segmentation, and financial modeling. Prior to working in digital analytics, she also held roles in market research and business intelligence at Wyndham. She received a BS in marketing from the University of Maryland and an MS in marketing from Columbia University.
All right, so welcome to Creating a Strategic Analytics Organization. My name is Jackie Distasi. I'm the Director of Digital Analytics at Wyndham Hotels and Resorts. We are the world's largest hotel franchisor, and we have a very large website, over 21 brand sites and 13 language variants. So I am responsible for all site performance and everything you can imagine, from customer journey analysis to forecasting. So all of that sits in our world. It's a really exciting area, and we have a lot of data to work with. So it's been a really amazing experience. So this is one of my favorite quotes. The goal is to turn data into information and information into insight. Carly Fiorina, former CEO of Hewlett Packard. So I think it's a really amazing thought process. I think a lot of times it's really the crux of analytics functions. In short, data is a means to an end. We tag our site to get some raw data. We take that raw data and we visualize it into stories. But from there, we really need to use our knowledge of the business and create these meaningful connections to our findings. And so we really need to go even a step further than this quote, and we need to recommend changes and implement them so that we can lead to improvements in our business and our organization. So I think a lot of analytics teams really fall short in this area, and they really focus on just raw data, and I need to answer a question and it ends there, and it's a very finite experience. But rather, we should be thinking about, what are those insights and recommendations and change that we can make for our teams. And so analytics is really best positioned to do that from a strategy perspective, because they have all this information about the data that their organization has, right? They're aware of how everything is performing. And so that's why strategy above all else should be in part of your thought process as you look at data. So I know we've talked a little bit about why data is important and why we want to take it a step further. But remember that data is not a bubble, right? Visualization and telling stories alone just aren't enough. And so we have to go to that next step of implementation. And so we're going to walk through some key tips and tricks for how to do that at your organization. So we need to turn analytics into insights, and from there, we need to make those meaningful changes to our business. So how do we accomplish that? So I think that there are really three key areas that allow you to make this organizational shift at your business. So building trust is the number one thing, that institutional trust in data. It's this foundation that we build on, and without it, we really can't move forward in maturing as an analytics organization. From there, who on your team matters? And analysts who analyze matter. Human capital is the absolute number one resource that you have at your disposal. And as a manager of analytics, properly teaching and training those people to think strategically is so important and just can't be understated enough. And the last step is to truly have leadership support. So not only as a subject matter expert in data, but also in that strategy piece that we talked about. So this really lays the foundation for implementation and analytics and insights that ultimately you can use to transform your business. So talking about that institutional trust in data, we're just going to break down some tips and tricks to bring that to life. So an SDR, This is one of my favorite topics. So an SDR, for those of you that don't know, is a solution design reference, and it's a technical document that you really use to just outline your analytics requirements. So it should tell you, what your analytics tags are, what they're used for, what data layer element that they're leveraging, how they're implemented. It's great for both the business side and the people that are doing the technical implementation. So I know I can't see everyone right now because this is a virtual conference, but I want you to ask yourself, do I have a current and comprehensive SDR? And I know I can't see you, but I'm feeling that there's a lot of crickets right now, because most people's answer to this is no, or it's very outdated, or we haven't touched it since the implementation. And so this has to turn into a yes to move forward in that analytics maturity curve. I'm very fortunate to work in an organization where we take documentation of analytics very seriously in the digital sphere, and we do have a very current SDR, and we update it constantly. And so it's kind of our source of truth, and we use that as a means of determining whether or not our analytics tagging is meeting the criteria that it should meet, and it really helps with governance, because without that, there's really no basis for you to say whether or not your data is what it should be. So please have a current SDR. It's such a easy thing to do. Well, it's not that easy, right? You're going to take a lot of time doing it, but it's very important and it's well worth doing, so it is worth the time. That next step is record defects. I know this sounds so simple, and so why doesn't everyone have that? But I think it's really important to remember that logging and recording every single thing that happens in your channel is super important. You can't effectively analyze data if you don't know, or frankly just can't remember what happened on your website like a year ago. So now is the time. Every time something happens, record it, write it down. Keeping a running log of all of that stuff is going to allow your analytics team to provide meaningful context when they're analyzing your data. And it really just also allows you to prepare your leadership team for potential headwinds. So for example, maybe this time last year, you launched the most amazing thing ever on your website, and now a year later, you're about to lap that. And so while you might have been up XYZ% year over year, maybe it's going to optically change because you're about to lap this really big, important thing that you did last year. And being able to, in advance of that cutover, talk to the leadership team and prepare them for those headwinds and what it's going to do optically to performance is really important. So the next step that I think is really important is enabling alerts. We use hourly and daily alerts enabled in Adobe Analytics, and they're monitoring that performance on all of our key ratios, key metrics automatically. So if you don't do this, it's so simple to do. I'm sure other tools, if you're not using Adobe Analytics, I'm sure they have something very similar. But we use them specifically, most importantly, for our site health ratios. So how did people move through the booking flow to understand if there are drop-offs or there's challenges or something happened or a release went in and something broke. And these are key things that we monitor at the hourly level. And that way, you know right away if something has gone wrong. In addition to that, we also have several IT site health tools that we have on our website in addition to Adobe Analytics. And so those are really focused on more technical things, page load times, DOM, all of that. But we do use those as well, which have alerting capabilities within those tools. In addition to that, when you're thinking about setting up an alert, I think it's really important to think about who is it that receives this alert. Because just getting the alert is not very helpful. You actually have to do something with it, and you have to have people that receive them that are empowered to make changes and fix things and triage. And so for us, that means our incident management team, it means members of IT, members of our digital leadership team, the whole digital analytics team would be notified. And that way, particularly if it's a night or weekend, you have enough people on there that are enabled to make change, that can go in, look at it, triage it, and take the right steps to make a correction. So just keep that in mind as you're just setting it up. It's not enough to just set it up. You have to set it up the right way and with the right people. So data governance dashboards, I think, can be really powerful in terms of how you monitor data quality, right? So just collecting data alone is not enough. It has to be the right data. It has to be clean. It has to be accurate. And that really helps build trust, right? So you need to enable those variables and making sure that their firing is expected. And so, for example, for us, brand is a really important global variable that we capture on every hit of every visit. We do have 21 brands, so it's very important that we are capturing that all of the time. And so what you can do is make a calculated metric that says, if brand does not exist, take all visits where brand does not exist and divide it by all visits. And that way you have this ratio of understanding whether or not brand global variable is firing all of the time. And if it's not, then you can really work to triage what's causing that. We at Wyndham use a less than 1% error rate that we hold all of our variables accountable to. And so if we see rates of more than 1% error, we will work to triage that. Even if it's less than that, we'll look into it. But that's really our cutoff for this is an acceptable level of error on our tagging. And then the last thing that I think is really cool that we've just started using recently is Claravine. So it's a really great tool for campaign ID governance. And so for those of you that do offsite acquisition, you're bringing in people to your site from paid media or display or Meta or wherever. It's really great to be able to tag your campaign IDs very cleanly. So prior to using Claravine, we did have a pretty robust tagging structure, but you're really reliant on all team members to follow documentation. And as I'm sure you can imagine, that doesn't always happen. So if you have a campaign and it's $8 off, and that's the name of the campaign, you might have someone that spells out the word 8. They might do 8 off, $, number 8 off, misspellings of those words. And now all of a sudden you're tasked with doing campaign performance and analysis. And then you're like, well, now I got to manually cull all this together because the process was not followed. And so Claravine makes that really easy in that administrators can set the taxonomy that people have to use. And so what we do is lock down lists of campaign names and brands and things like that, so we can ensure that what's going into Adobe Analytics is clean. And that way, when we use it, it's much more easy for us to do robust reporting and make sure that we can actually capture everything that we need to capture. We're not accidentally missing some portion of production because it was tagged incorrectly. So really great tool, highly recommend. I would also say that don't just use it for offsite acquisition either. We use it for on-site merchandising placements. And so on our website, and again, it's a very large site, every single on-site merchandising placement that we has an internal campaign ID associated with it. And that really allows us to understand the efficacy of our on-site merchandising in addition to how our off-site acquisition placements perform and how they interact together. So really helpful there. So we talked about data governance and building trust. That next step then becomes education. So how do we kind of get people on board with what we're doing and make sure that they understand what they need to understand? And I think it's really important that your business teams that you support become advocates for using data all of the time. And they're not going to do that unless they understand what it is and how it impacts their world. So there's 3 key things that I think really help to do this. The number one thing is define metrics and definitions that you're talking about all of the time. So everyone needs to be on the same page. A lot of times what I'll find is that I think that people think they know what they're talking about, but then I'll find out, oh, actually I thought a visit was this, or actually I thought an order meant this. And so it's so easy for the team to just sit down, take some time and define what is it that we talk about every day to the business team, so we can make sure that there's alignment and that everyone is on the same page, which is really great. The next thing I think is really important, specifically as it relates to defining things, is explaining how ratios work. Ratios are a big part of what we do in digital analytics. It helps us to understand successive key flows within our website and our success of converting different pieces of the path. And so I think a lot of times we take for granted the mathematical aptitude of our own team, and we forget that the people that we talk to might not grasp things the same way that an analyst might. And so, for example, something like conversion. Just because conversion's down doesn't mean we're making less money, and vice versa. Just because conversion's up doesn't mean we're making more. And things like that are really important to give that context, help people understand how ratios are driven, and define what those metrics are so that the teams can understand and be on the same page when you're talking about performance. The next step is really illustrating everything. So, the power of a picture can't be underestimated. A picture's worth 1,000 words, as they say. And it's everything from simple to complex. I think you really need to illustrate everything. On the screen right now, you can see some of the ways that we illustrate key ratios in our booking flow. So we put, a what is it and why does it matter statement on every slide of our presentation so that people really grasp what it is visually, and it helps people to understand. And so this nebulous concept that you're talking about, they can see it in a picture and it's more tangible to them. And then the last step is really just reinforcing basics. We include the illustrations and we talk about what it is, but really driving home why does it matter and reinforcing that over and over and over again. If we can't convince people that data matters to the business and why it's important, we're not going to be able to get traction to push the business forward and implement new things. And so it's really, really important that they understand the purpose of what we're doing and why it impacts them. So the next step that we're going to talk about is analysts who analyze. I know this sounds very foundational, but I find a lot of times that analytics teams do a lot less analyzing and a lot more just, pulling reports, which is very different than analysis. So I think that, the first thing we need to ask ourselves is why. as one of those kids growing up that they asked why over and over and over again, and I, very inquisitive. And so I implore you to do the same thing with analytics as well. So always ask why people are asking for the data that they are. Sometimes you'll get people that come to you and say, I need this data point for this range. And I'll say, okay, help me understand, what are you trying to do with it? What are you going to do with the data? Like, where are you coming from? Because without that context, you might be giving them data for a different problem, or you might have better data available than what they've asked for. You got to remember that the person that knows the most about your data is your analytics team. So, you need to probe and make sure that what you're providing is sufficient for the question at hand. And also, your analysts are really responsible for knowing what people need and surfacing that information, and you're the expert there. So, spend time with your clients, make sure you're doing all of those good questions, and your the onus is on you to make sure that your implementation is known inside and out, and that you can recommend truly the best approach for what the question is. And then from there, stay in contact. A lot of times I'll see, we're working on a presentation and we find something groundbreaking day one. Don't wait until day 10 when the presentation is complete to reach back out to the business and say, oh my gosh, we found this most amazing thing. Because they may come back to you and be like, well, obviously that happened because X. And maybe you're not aware of something that happened. And so it's really important to have that back and forth communication with the teams that you're supporting, and keep them, apprised of what it is that you're working on, because there might be a very easy explanation that you don't know about. And waiting until the presentation is done, you might have done things differently had you had some additional context. So really important to just stay in the loop with the business. So we asked why. Now the next question we want to ask ourselves is, so what? I think this is really, really important. So, a lot we've done, I think, come a long way in the industry in terms of data storytelling. And I'm a huge, huge proponent of how important it is to tell stories with data. A lot of times data storytelling stops short, though, of that final piece, which is, what is the next step? Like, so what? You've told me this data, you've told me this story, you've shown me the pictures. Now what? And you really need to think about that every time that you put together a presentation, you're getting up in front of people, you're evangelizing your data. So important. So once your analysts have pulled the raw data, they've looked at it, they've analyzed it, they've told that story, they've provided the insights, now they have to provide recommendations. What's that next step? So you've got to tell people, again, why does that information matter? So whenever you can, project impact. Whether it's positive or negative on the website, like, what is it that I'm seeing, and what is that going to do for our business? Can it hurt us? Can it help us? And so once you've answered that, you want to form a strategy around those next steps, and it can be surfaced to a team to take action. So I think that's really important. I've also found that spoon feeding data and insights is highly recommended. A lot of times people will look at presentations and data before they read the insights. They'll just look at the picture and they'll say, I know what this means. And they'll start talking about what they feel it means and what the next step should be. And you gotta put the brakes on that and say, I need you to interpret this the way that I am, because the analytics teams are the experts in the data. They know far more about the data on the site, or they should know far more about the data and what's going on in the business than anybody, because they're looking at it all day, every day. So truly, it is the analytics team's job to tell people what they should take away from their analysis. You don't want to leave that door open to interpretation, because if somebody takes something away from your presentation that maybe it didn't mean exactly that, and they ring a bell, it's really hard to unring it across the organization. So be really conscious of that, and make sure you're really, in a nice way, spoon feeding that information to the teams that you support, so that the right insights and the right interpretation of your data is what's getting out there. So we've talked about building trust and, analysts who really analyze their data. The last piece is really leadership support to transform. So when we look at that, there are a couple areas that we want to look at. Leadership buy-in is so important to doing this. You have to get the buy-in of leadership in order to make change in any organization. And so we've built that trust. We have the analysts that were actually analyzing the data. And now it's a lot easier for leadership to buy in, because they trust what you're doing and they see that there's context and they see the benefit and the potential for the website. it's also really important, particularly in an analytics function, that you have consistent, exceptional performance out of your analytics team all of the time. Leadership needs to feel like they can trust you and go to you with any problem, and that you're going to come up with a viable solution supported by data. And if the wrong insights are going out or tainted data is going out, it becomes a lot more difficult to maintain that trust. So you really want to make sure you're in tip-top shape in terms of what the team is putting out. So I mentioned before that analytics teams are, by far the best positioned to be subject matter experts across the organization and what's happening on the site. They're just looking at it every day. And so, strategy is something that they should be really closely aligned with. And so, having that deep understanding in all areas of your site makes you completely invaluable to the leadership team. And it helps really ingrain you as a strategy expert and a subject matter expert in that area. So be sure to leverage that because you have it at your disposal. So a key tactic to know is that you need to know who to influence and what they care about. So, you wouldn't give you might have the same data, but you're going to message it differently to different people because you're going to leverage what you know to be interesting and important to those people. And so you want to frame up your findings in a way that's most meaningful to your audience. So if I'm, presenting to the leadership of loyalty, I'm going to tailor my recommendations and my thought process around what does this mean to loyalty versus digital versus finance. And you really want to make sure that you're communicating the right way. And then lastly, I just can't stress enough the importance of communicating the impacts of your findings. So it's really nice to get up there and say, oh, we found this thing on the site, and if we rolled it out across the board, it could be really great. It could be even greater if you tell people, hey, the opportunity here is in the millions. People are really going to take notice when you put price tags on things. So be sure to do that when you're talking to leadership. And this next piece is really the infrastructure for support. So it's great if leadership buys in. That's definitely a crucial piece. But you need to make sure that the infrastructure and the foundation for making changes there before changes can happen. So, coming back to being a subject matter expert, the analytics team needs to know everything about the business. So to get a recommendation across the finish line, right? You found something on the site that you want to make a change for and you think it could really improve the business. You need to know what the existing infrastructure is and what the limitations are. And you want to make sure that you're able to speak really knowledgeably on that topic. You don't want to get in a room and start saying, oh, we need to change all these different things on the site, not knowing all the while that they're really prohibitive in some way. So really being an expert, not just in the data, not just in performance, but also like how do our sites work, and implementation is very key to getting this across the finish line. So, knowing the landscape allows you to highlight the areas that you would need to be modified, right? So let's say I know, hey, we don't have this in place today. We would need to do these things. Highlighting that to leadership is very important. You want to scope the level of effort. You want to know how many people need to be involved, who are the right people to be involved. So do your homework. Even though you may not be the one leading the charge on implementation, you're going to be a key player in it because you're the one that really surfaced this information. They're going to be coming to you to understand as they make changes, are they working? And so you're really a key player there, and you should be really aware of the landscape. And lastly, the most important thing is just prioritize the things that matter most. It seems really simple, but you really want to make sure that, if you found something on the site that's causing a problem, and people are dropping off out of flow and they're not converting or whatever it is, quantify it and prioritize it. And not just quantify it for, hey, this is what's happened thus far. Say, hey, if we don't fix this in the next 30 days, this is the revenue on the table that we've lost. If we don't fix it in the next 90 days, this is what you're going to lose. If we waited a year to fix this, this is the amount of money that we have lost. When you frame it up that way, I think people are much more likely to prioritize. Likewise, if you find a really great opportunity, maybe you do something for one brand or product on your site, but not for the others, and you think it could perform really well, like go through and forecast that and say, all right, I know what it does today. This is my estimated benefit. And that way people can understand the opportunity that's being left on the table. So when it comes down to what we're slotting into a release, which can be really, difficult to get stuff into, if you're prioritizing the right way and you're putting the right price tags on it, you're going to get a lot more traction from the leadership team and making sure that you can get that through. So, in conclusion, I just want to do some just really key takeaways. Building trust and document everything. It's really important. These are basics. They shouldn't be put on the back burner. I think a lot of times people say to themselves, oh, I can document that later, or, oh, I'll remember that thing happened. And you're probably not going to. So now is a good time. It's the beginning of the year. It's a foundational piece. Like, take some time, clean up your documentation, and make sure that you're really building this innate sense of trust with your organization, because you really can't move forward without that. And then, everything should have context. So we don't just send out raw data. You should always provide insights. You should always provide recommendations. It's not a sometimes thing. It's an always thing. And it's really something that you should be working with your teams on. Like, if you set the basis for that and you set the foundation for that, your analysts are going to do that as well. And so it comes down to the leadership of the team and ensuring that that is the process that we follow. We never just send raw data in a silo. And then lastly, you want to get leadership support by being this core strategic partner, right? We talked about building that trust and having them go to you as a strategy partner, because you're so well versed in the performance of the site. So make sure you're surfacing those opportunities and you're seeing them through. And the more that you do that, the more leadership support that you're going to get. It takes time, but it's definitely possible. So just in closing, I want to say thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. My email's on the screen. And thank you. I'll see you on Slack.
Thanks so much for watching this presentation. Join us on the Analytics Nexus Slack to talk with our presenters about this topic and more.